Hi guys, James at RampantLionReviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one we're actually going to start off a little bit of a mini series. Over the next 2 weeks or so you're going to be getting German beer reviews, and the main reason for that is that I have a crate of German beer over there that I'm just working my way through, because if I leave it until I come back from Sweden it will most definitely be out of date. But for this one, since it's the first in this mini series, I thought it'd be really cool to return to the brewery where my love of beer first began. So we're going to go to Brauerei Bamberg, which, as many of you will know, is the producer of the famous Schlenkerla beer. So today we're going to have a taste of Aecht Schlenkerla Urbock, and I think this is the last one of the kind of big produced Schlenkerla beers that I'm actually to review for you on the channel. But I'm not even sure if I've actually tried this one. I think I've tried Untappd in the Brauhaus, but not actually in the bottle. So this should be an interesting review for us anyway. But as always with my Schlenkerla and my Bamberg beer reviews, I want to dedicate this to my good friend Daniel from my early days of university. I've been over and visited him and his wife Johanna in Bamberg twice, so it's always really cool to do these beers. So this one is dedicated to them. But anyway, as is usual with my beer reviews then, I'll take you through a very brief history of the brewery. It will only be 2 or 3 minutes long, but if you want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward. The brewery website's in the video description for you below, along with a link to the other reviews that I've done from Schlenkerla before. Hopefully I can get back over there and review a few more of their beers at some points for you, preferably some of the more unusual ones. But we'll see how we go with that. So please check out that link, and also add me as a friend on Untappd, and check out the Facebook page that I've made for the channel too. But anyway, to move on to the history of the Schlenkerla brewery. It's located, as I told you, in the historic town of Bamberg in Germany, which is just to the northwest of Nuremberg in Bavaria. But this is also Franconia in Germany, which is a very famous beer region. So Bamberg itself is actually really cool because it went largely untouched during the Second World War, and the city has a lot of wineries and monasteries, and you can go around and visit all of these. But the Brauhaus itself is located right in the centre of the old town, and it's a very famous and well-known brewery throughout Germany in fact. But there are quite a few breweries in that region producing Rauch beers. One of the lesser known ones is Spezial, and they also produce a very, very nice Rauch beer as well. So go and check out the Franconia region. About 300 breweries just in that very small part of Germany at northern Bavaria. Very, very beautiful part of the country, and a lot of rich culture and heritage and things going on there. But the Schlenkerla Brauhaus itself is in Dominikanerstrasse in the city, and the Brauhaus, as you might have guessed, was neighboured by a Dominican monastery. And the history of the tavern started with the formation of this Dominican monastery in the 14th century, and the first mention of a brewery there is in the year 1405. The Brauhaus building was apparently sold a number of times between 1405 and 1615, and during the 30 Years' War, which was 1618 to 1648, the building was destroyed quite a few times and rebuilt. But the brewery itself was founded in the year 1678, and before this year the reports are scarce, but there's far more documentation after this year of 1678, so there might have been a few other things going on at that time too. But since 1678 there have been numerous owners of the brewery, but one of the most important owners was Johann Wolfgang Heller, and he took over the brewery in the mid 18th century, and he owned an old rock cellar for beer storage up on the Kalberg Hill, which is just outside of Bamberg, and this storage facility was later moved to Stephansberg Hill, which is actually inside of the town, the city limits today. But over the course of the 19th and 20th centuries, the brewery moved gradually to the location just above these ancient cellars of Stephansberg. But in 1877, Andreas Grasser became the owner of the new brewery, and he actually had a slight physical handicap where this meant that his arms would move about in an odd way as he walked, and the Franconian dialect, the Franconian word for actually describing this was Schlenkern, and after a while people began to refer to the brewery as Schlenkerla, despite the official name of the brewery being Hellebräu. So this is really quite a wee interesting point as to why the beer is called Schlenkerla, and as you can see on the bottle caps and on the beer itself down here, Andreas Grasser is actually on there with his walking stick, so you can see the real origin of the name Schlenkerla. But in 1907, Andreas' son Michael took over the running of the brewery, and by this time more and more people were visiting the brewery, and they actually leased a part of the former monastery from the Bavarian government, who had become the owners during the course of secularization. scene. And I think that was maybe in about the 1830s or something. Correct me on that if I'm wrong. But in the 1920s, the buildings in Dominikanerstrasse, mainly the chapel front of the Dominican monastery, these were being restored by the Germanic Museum of Nuremberg in the 1920s. And in 1960, this restored part of the tavern was bought from the government, and the company and Michael Grazer's daughter, Elizabeth, she and her husband Jakob Trum took over the running of the Schlenkerla brewery. But in 1967 they passed the brewery on to their son German Trum, who I believe is still in charge of it today. But over the years they've modernised their brewing facilities and opened up new rooms within the Brauhaus, and they've also added a beer garden as well in what was the former courtyard of the monastery, and I think that's what I was sitting in the last time I went to the Brauhaus, and I sat out there and enjoyed a good few Rauch beers. Beautiful, beautiful place to enjoy some German food and some German beer as well. But in recent years the facade of the Brauhaus has been modernised, and the famous historic ceiling paintings of the monastery have been restored as well. So it's a very, as I told you at the start of the video, Bamberg is a very a city rich very much in culture, mainly kind of religious culture and things like that, but also the German food and beer and things like that. So it really is a wonderful, wonderful place to go, and Schlenkerla, like I told you, is probably one of the most well-known German breweries. But anyway, that's your kind of brief history of the Schlenkerla brewery. Just to list the other beers you can get from these guys. The Rauch beers, you get the Märzen, which is the brown trimmed one. Each of them have different labels, incidentally. You have the Urbock, which is this guy here. Originally this had a red trim around the label, but it now has the gold one, as you can see. And there's also the Weizen as well, which has a green one. And they do have a special edition beer that is produced every year for Lent called Fasten beer, which I reviewed for you just a couple of videos ago, and that has a purple trim around the label as well. They also have their Aecht Doppelbock, which is their Christmas beer, and that has a very dark green label. Very, very nice beer, that. And they also have their lager beer as well, which has a green, a sort of bluish, light bluish, sky blue background on the label too. And that's a Munich style Helles, but it does have a little bit of the smoky flavours in it, but they're all very nice beers, and I would recommend you try them. As I said, if you're interested in the reviews of those ones, do go and check out my link that I put in the description for you below. But anyway, without further ado, let's actually get on to the tasting section of the video. So I'll just bring up the camera, let you have a little look at this one. So as you can see, as I was telling you before, you can see Andreas Grasser down here holding his walking stick. This is also on the bottle cap, incidentally. You can see him there with his walking stick. I think I can just see that in the camera, that you can see the gold there. There he is with his walking stick. But all of the Schlenkerla beers are presented in this way, with this kind of scroll label on them. As I told you, each different beer has a different coloured trim around the label, and you also have, for some of them, a different background colour as well. But you can see on the top says Bamberg Spezialität and the Altstadt Bamberg, which just means old town, as you might have guessed. And that's the famous, on that little bit of the label there, that's the famous Rathaus in Germany, which is the townhouse. I always like to joke in Germany with my German friends that Rathaus is quite funny, because many people say that politicians are rats, and obviously in the townhouse that's where they would all be, but the Germans never ever think of that joke. They always find it quite funny when you tell them that. On the back it tells you original Schlenkerla smoke beer. Aecht Schlenkerla Urbock is the intense sibling of the classic Märzen smoke beer. Exactly like the classic, all its barley malts are smoked over beechwood logs. Its higher smoke malt concentration and longer maturation in the 700-year-old cellars between Bamberg create a taste profile of most intense smokiness, beautifully balanced with a deep malt sweetness. And this guy comes in at 6.5% alcohol as well. So brewed in accordance, as you might have guessed, with the Bavarian purity law of 1516, or the Reinheitsgebot as it's more widely known. So without further ado, let's get this guy open and we'll get on with the tasting here. So this guy is a more, I heard that it's a little bit more fruity. It's got a nice kind of very dark caramel in it compared to the other ones, but it's got all the typical things you would expect of the Rauch beers. So it should be an absolutely beautiful one for us to try. I'll just sugar it up and see if I can get a bit more of a head on it. As I always tell you, Germans will not drink a beer unless it has a good head on it. They'll send it back, and I've seen it done when I've been over there, but you can't blame them for that. That's the way they like it. So as you can see, this beer is poured a really, really nice kind of dark mahogany, slightly rosewoodish colour. If I hold it up to the light, I'm not sure if you can really see it that well, but there is a little bit of a kind of ruby tinge to it actually. It's almost in a way reminiscent of, it's kind of a similar colour to Coca-Cola actually, but yeah, it looks very, very nice. There's a kind of half finger of a frothy sort of slightly off-white head, more of a kind of slightly beigey colour head on this one, as you can see, but it looks very nice. There's a good little bit of sediment actually floating in this one, and I've only had it in the fridge for about 2 days, but there is a good little bit of sediment in it in there. Maybe that's, I don't know if that is just from the 2 days or from when I brought it back from Germany a couple of weeks ago. So yeah, looks a very, very nice beer, as you can see. So let's have a look at the aroma for this one. As you would expect with these German Rauch beers, there's a huge smoky malt characteristic to it. It's quite meaty actually. It's got a little bit of that. It's not quite in the same way as some of the Scottish smoke beers are, where you've got the more peaty aromas coming off it. It's definitely a really kind of malty, big roasted meaty malt character on this one. It's very sweet meaty though, and that's the typical trademark of these beers. You can pick out a little bit of a woody note with this one too. There's not really much carbonation visible in this one, incidentally, just a few big bubbles around the bottom side of the glass. But you can smell a little bit of a woody aroma infused into this one. And the only one that doesn't use, the only one of their beers that doesn't use beech logs is actually the Aecht, because it uses oak logs, and you get this really nice vanilla infused flavour with the malt base in this one. But as I say, a nice big roasted malt character with this. Big, sweet, meaty smoked aromas. Pardon me, just took a little bit of that up the nose there. But yeah, a nice kind of caramel sweetness to it underlying. But there's nice darker caramel or treacly notes too. And you can pick up a little bit of German kind of, that typical German brown rye bread in this one too. Really beautifully done. There's maybe a little bit of red fruit coming out of it. You can pick up just a little bit of that as you swirl it up. But yeah, it's mainly the sweet meaty maltiness, which is what you expect from this beer, and a bit of a kind of darker toasted caramel and some German brown rye bread characters you're getting out of this beer. It has everything you would expect of the Rauch beer, but without further ado, let's get stuck into this guy. So this is the Schlenkerla Urbock Rauch beer from Bamberg in Germany. Slanje. I can see what they mean with this when they say it's the big brother of the Märzen beer. It's a lot more intense in flavour, and the Märzen, don't get me wrong, the Märzen is a beautiful beer within its own right, but this one is, it just packs such a bigger punch than the Märzen does. Yeah, so much like the aroma with this one, you've got a nice big sweet meaty flavour to this one, but the smoke characteristic in it is a kind of separate flavour, if that makes sense. You've got a nice tasty meaty characteristic to it, but the smoke just is that completely, it's more intense than the other ones I've come across from Schlenkerla, and you actually just feel it around the edges of the tongue there. As your mouth adjusts to this beer, it just comes in and rains down on your tongue. It's really nice. But yeah, you've got a nice German rye bread malt base that just blankets the middle of your palate there, and on top of that you get this nice toasted character. There's a nice kind of sweet caramel flavour in it, but there is a good little bit of a darker, more treacly, or a molasses as the Americans would call it. There's a darker, treacly molasses flavour to this as well. Just a sweet caramel, it goes right down the middle of your palate there. But these smoky characteristics just come in right on top of that there. It all blends together really, really quite well. And as your mouth adjusts to the flavour in this one, you will pick up a little bit of the kind of woody and nutty flavours that are kind of infused throughout this beer. That's what makes the beers very interesting from Schlenkerla. It's just how complex they are, and there's a lot of stuff going on in them, particularly this one, because it's the bigger brother of the Märzen, which is the more common one that they produce. And it is a beautiful beer, but I've never tried this one out of the bottle, but you do realise it when you've had them all. This one is the one that packs the biggest punch. It really is beautiful. Yeah, that kind of woody and nutty flavour just builds on top of that German kind of rye bread malt base in there as you drink this beer. It goes really, really quite beautifully. The interesting little quirk on this one in comparison with the other ones though, you'll feel a little oily bubble just forming behind the very front of your tongue, where you would expect the hop characters in this one, but you get just a little bit of a kind of slightly figgy red fruit. It's not sharp as you would expect from a kind of regular Doppelbock beer, if that makes sense. It's just a nice, slightly smooth, figgy character, and that's the interesting quirk with this one, is there is just that little hint of fruitiness to it, which is different from all the rest of them. Yeah, there is just a very mild, nice figgy flavour in there, and it's just another interesting quirk to a beer style that I really love. This was where my love of beer really began, and to try the kind of big brother of the original beer that got me into craft beer really is quite something special. But around the edges of the palate on this one, at the very back corners of your tongue, I think there's that kind of typical German noble hop characteristic in there. Probably Hallertau hops that they're using in this beer, since it is from Bamberg, but maybe some more local ones as well. There are hops from around the Nuremberg region, but around the back sides of your tongue there, right in the corners, there is a bit of earthy hop character, and that helps build the transition between the smoother hoppiness and the kind of smoky malts that you're getting on the palate. In the aftertaste, incidentally, it is that smoky characteristic. It really is lingering there, quite burnt, quite smoky, but it's really, really nicely done. But around the rest of the tongue, it's a very smooth and very light sort of grassy hop aroma, or flavour, sorry, and that's what makes me think it is the typical German noble hops that are used in this beer. But there's a lot going on. It's a more malt forward beer, as you would expect from the Rauch beer, and it's just beautifully done. There's not much more you can say about it. The quirk, as I say, is the kind of figgy fruits that are in this one. So yeah, in terms of the mouthfeel, this one, as I said, this is quite a full-bodied beer. It feels a little bit stickier than the Märzen, I would say. It's a bit more full-bodied than even the Märzen one, which is in itself a big beer. But it's got a nice smooth carbonation to it, a nice big sweet malty base. There's a good bit of a dry character from the kind of roasted burnt flavours in this beer too. So it's really nice, and the lingering flavours in this beer really are those burnt, smoky characters. And even in the other ones, I remember the other ones being just a little bit more sweet and caramel malty, but this one really is the smoke that comes out. It's more this is an even smokier beer than the other smoked beers that Schlenkerla do, but it's beautiful, and any beer you're going to have from Schlenkerla, you will not be disappointed with it. They've all got their little quirks. That the Weizen, for example, has a little bit of banana flavour, and all the typical Hefeweizen elements infused into it. The Märzen is a bit lighter and a bit more kind of bread and caramel focused. This guy has a little quirkiness from the fruit, and the Aecht has this really beautiful vanilla flavouring, and the Fasten beer is another really interesting one. It's a lighter bready characteristic that's in that, so they all have their interesting points, but for me this is actually probably my favourite one, apart from perhaps the Aecht that I've tried. So if my go-to beers from Schlenkerla would be this one and the Aecht when it's available. Both beautiful beers, but all of them, as I say, from Schlenkerla are beautiful. So anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this beer review, and I haven't been rambling on too much. This is a brew that I really love, so I hope you appreciate my enthusiasm for Schlenkerla. Really beautiful beer. I will review Spezial as well, which is another Rauch beer from Bamberg, quite soon, so do check out that video as well. But I hope you've enjoyed this one. Been very cool to return to Schlenkerla, where my love of beer started. If you do happen to have tried this beer, as always, please let me know in the comment section your own thoughts on this beer below. Always interesting to read them. Please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. I hope you've enjoyed this beer review, and until the next one, Prost. But please do also like my Facebook page and also add me as a friend on Untappd. It'd be really cool to hear from you guys there. But until then, Slàinte.